Hi guys, welcome back to part 3 now on basic tuning tips for this Carburetor 998. We've already looked at the air system, so the air filter, that was in part 1, and there was air leaks in the carburetor, so you can check out that. And then moved on to the timing, so back advance and mechanical advance. That stuff is in part 2. So this is the third part. We're going to just talk about the fueling quickly, and then also the electronics, so you know, your coil and your distributor, HT leads, plugs, etc. So let's crack into that, and if you haven't seen the other 2 parts, you can go check them out first. Okay, the first thing to talk about then is getting your mixture right. So this is HS4 carburetor. How do we adjust the mixture on that? Well, there is a mixture nut. I'll show you on the exploded diagram here. So there's a mixture nut there, and basically you just got to turn that to enrichen or lean the mixture. Now I think the sort of initial installation position is to wind it all the way up, which is make it as well, I'll just explain. So the needle's pointing down, and then the nut is effectively pushing up the seat. So the higher up the seat goes up the needle, because the needle's tapered this way with the point at the bottom, obviously, the higher up it goes, the less gap there is, you know, around the needle, so the less fuel can get through. So as you raise that up, it leans out the mixture, and that would be turning it clockwise, you know, doing it up. So what you want to do, wind it all the way up, and then 12 flats of the nut down should get you somewhere that will at least get the car started. And once you have that basic position, so I'll show you this picture here. So this is the needle just there coming out the bottom of the carburetor piston, you see. Once you have that needle in a reasonable position that you can actually start, then we can start adjusting the mixture. Now, question on how to get that right. There's basically 3 real options. So the free option is something called the lift pin. Now I'll try and show you that on this picture, but this is the lift pin here, and underneath the main body of the carburetor, sticking out, you should be able to put your hand under and feel this pin. When you put your finger on that pin, the first maybe ½ centimeter of lift is just against a lightweight spring, so it's pretty loose, you know, you can just press it up and down. Then you will start to feel a little bit of resistance. It details this procedure in the Haynes manual, but essentially have it running at idle as normal, lift the lift pin up till it makes contact with the bottom of the piston. You'll feel the resistance. Then what you want to do is lift that lift pin by about 1 millimeter, so just a tiny bit. And when you do that, one of 3 things is going to happen. Either it's going to bog down, it's going to rev up, or it's going to rev just a tiny little bit, and that's what you're looking for. So if it bogs down or if it revs up, then you're way too lean or you're way too rich. Again, it talks about it in the Haynes manual. If you lift it and the revs just lift a tiny bit, then that's where you need the mixture to be, to have the correct mixture at idle. You need the correct mixture at idle. Any mixture issues after that, further up the rev range, are down to the profile of your needle. So if it's correct at idle, and then, you know, at half throttle it's too lean, then that means that your needle is too wide at the midpoint of the needle. So we'll come back to that in a second. I'll just talk about the other two ways of getting the mixture right. So the second way, which I thought was a pretty cheap way of doing it, to be honest, but actually these days prices seem to have gone up quite a lot. The cheapest you can pick one of these up for now is around about £45, but I have seen them sold for, you know, £75. Anyway, what are we talking about? We're talking about this. It's called a colour tune, and this is made by Gunsons. So effectively what that is a replacement for one of your spark plugs, and you just take one of your spark plugs out, screw this into the spark plug hole. This section here sticks out the top and there's an extension on it, and you just put your HT lead on the top of here, and then here you've got glass, so you can actually see the colour of the explosions going on in their cylinder, and effectively based on that colour you can set how lean the mixture is or how rich the mixture is. Really yellow sparks, way too rich. Really white sparks, too lean. You want to be on that transition point between sort of blue and just starting to go yellow. Inside here is a little colour grade chart, and you can use that to set up. If I bring that in, maybe you can see in use there, giving a nice sort of bright blue explosion colour on that example. So yeah, that's an option, pretty simple. You can use that if you've got one. That one's about 20 years old, maybe even more. And then the third option would be to either use a rolling road and a tuner with something up the exhaust to measure the gases and the AFR, the air fuel ratio, or you can fit what's called a wideband sensor into the end of your downpipe or start of the exhaust and have a dial in the car, and then you can obviously monitor that as you're driving the car. The reason that that is good is because you can check it under load as well, so different throttle positions, different engine loads, etc., and just try and make sure that the mixture is in the right area, all to do with the what they call the stoichiometric. So those are the more expensive options. If you haven't got any of this, you can just use the lift pin on the bottom of the carburetor here. Okay, so I've seen wideband sensors on sort of Chinese websites going for as little as £45. Then on sort of motor specialists in the UK, they seem to be about 200. So you know, you can take chances on the cheap one. If you want to fit that, you've got to drill a hole in the exhaust, you've got to weld a collar on, you've got to screw in the sensor, then obviously you've got to wire it in, and then you've got to mount the gauge in the car. So you know, that's quite a lot of hassle, but it does give the ongoing measurements. Okay, so that's talking about fuel. Hopefully you've managed to set it with the lift pin and you've managed to get it roughly correct. So the next problem you're going to have is your needle. So as I say, you set it under idle. Now the needle's tapered like this, and along the needle there are 16 what they call stations, but basically increments up the needle, and each needle has a different width at each of those stations. So that corresponds to your throttle position, how far in and out the needle is, and the further in it is, obviously the less fuel you're going to get. You push the throttle and it draws out and pretty much opens up the hole completely at the thinnest part of the needle. So this one has got a stage 1. It comes with the stage 1 kit, typically comes with an AAU needle. If after all of this you find that you've got bad flat spots at half throttle or full throttle, then it's possible that you need to fit a totally different needle. I'll drop a slide in here with a website. You can look at different needles and their profiles, and you can make an educated guess based on the different needle graphs and curves, and you can compare them side by side, you know, So you've got a leaner needle at the bottom and a richer needle throughout the range at the top. And then you can just fit a new needle and see how it is. Obviously, to do that properly, you need to go on a tuning session, and there are guys who can take a needle out and actually reduce the width of the needle at certain points to dial it into your car. Okay, so now time to talk about the electronics system. So first up is the coil. Now, if you have got a 12-volt system, i.e. One of the earlier 998s, you will have a 3 ohm coil, and that 3 ohm coil will be direct fed all the time with 12 volts. Okay, so what that basically means is when the key is on the starter, or when the key's turned on, there's a 12-volt feed coming to the coil. The coil then has 3 ohms of resistance, okay, and that brings it down to the correct level, and then you get the spark on the king lead going to the distributor. So you've got 12 volts always going to your coil. Now, there is a system that came in later called a ballast coil system. Basically what they've done is they've run another wire from here to the fuse, top fuse at the back here, okay, and that wire has a resistance of 1.5 ohms. So when the car is running, you still want a 3 ohm resistance. So what that means is you have to have a 1.5 ohm coil. So 1.5 ohms coming from the ballast wire, resistor wire, and 1.5 ohms coming from the coil. Now, when you are on the key, actually trying to start the car for cold starts, as part of the cold start package, to help improve obviously the starting of these cars, it actually supplies the full 12 volts. So now you've got 12 volts coming to a 1.5 ohm coil, and what that means is you get a higher output from the coil, a bigger spark, and it helps the engine start. So why don't we have that all the time? Well, the problem is you burn out your points, okay? So you can't have a 1.5 ohm coil on a 12 volt car, okay? You can switch over to a 3 ohm coil and run a permanent 12 volt cable if you want to, or you can stick with the 1.5 ohm, better for cold starts, and then it brings the spark power down to the normal level effectively, because it's only a 1.5 ohm coil. Now, you need to check your coil, and you also need to check the resistor. First thing to do with a meter is set it onto the 200 ohm scale here. Once you've got your meter on the 200 ohm scale, put the 2 meter prongs together and check what the resistance is, because you're going to have to take that away from the value that you measure on the coil. So here we've got 0.06 at the moment. If I put that down, you can't see, but it's reading 0.06, 0.07, and that's with the prongs clamped together. If I just hold them together like that, tiny bit more resistance, 0.8. Okay, now what we're going to do is place across the coil, not the king lead, but either side, the plus and minus of the coil. Okay, we're going to measure that coil as best we can by pushing quite hard onto the terminals. So here I'm getting a reading of 2.1, 2 or 2.1. I'll try and bring you over. So there you can see me measuring my ballast coil, and it's basically showing, well, now 1.9. And if I take that off and try and hold these together, I've got enough hands, which I don't. So there's the 0.8, 0.7. Back here, So we've got 0.7, and now it's showing 2. So take 0.7 away from the 2, it's giving us 1.3. So kind of there or thereabouts. Should be about 1.5 for the ballast coil. And then the other thing to do is check from the top fuse right back there, down the ballast wire, which is the pink and white and pink and yellow, and you measure there and you get the 1.5 ohms as well. If you don't get 1.5 ohms on there, then you need to change that cable. Okay, so that's how you measure your coil. 3 ohms for a 12-volt system on the older ones. If you've got the ballast wire, 1.5 ohms. If you've got electronic ignition and not points, so then you have what's called a high energy system, you can run a 0.8 ohm coil, and then you will get a bigger energy spark. Now what you have to do with your bigger energy spark is have a slightly different gap on your spark plugs. So let's just talk about the spark plugs quickly. 1 second. So there's a spark plug. Just before we talk about that, actually, we're going to talk about the HT leads. So these are new HT leads here. Okay. Now HT leads should measure about 8 kilo ohms per meter. 8 to 10 kilo ohms per meter is probably what you want to aim for. Obviously these leads are only about 1/3 of a meter long, so we're talking about maybe 2 kilo ohms per lead. Okay, maybe even less than that for new leads. Now if I take one of my old leads, so here's one of my old leads. This time take your meter, set it onto the probably the 20k. Okay, and I'll try and show you. I already know what these measure at because that's why I changed them. Right, so here's an old one, right? 10.5 kilo ohms. So this is somewhere between maybe like 6 or 7 times the amount of resistance that you want to see. You also have the king lead as well in that circuit. So you've got 10 kilo ohms here, 10 kilo ohms for the king lead. So that's 20k. And what you really want to make sure you get the highest possible power spark is about 1.5 for each lead. So that would be 3. So that's what these new leads measure at. So if you've got old leads on your car, get your meter out, check them. I think it's 15 quid for a new set. So you may as well get in there and change those. Okay, so now we're on to spark plugs. So here's the spark plug for this car. This is a BP6ES. That's actually the recommended plug. You can fit BP5ES. Now, a 5 is a hotter plug. What that means is the amount of electrode that's sticking out with the insulator on it is slightly different length. You get more electrode on a 5 than you do on a 6, and more on a 6 than you do on a 7. So a 5 is called a hotter plug, and what that means is because there's more electrode sticking out, it can dissipate the heat more quickly after firing. Okay, a colder plug like a 7 or a 6 fouls up more, and a hotter plug gives more, it's more prone to wear or burnout, and it is more prone to it gives more detonation potentially. So it's up to you. Basically it should run on a BP6 ES. You can run it on a BP5 ES, something like a the more performance engines, they run on 6s or possibly even 7s. The 850s and the 998s probably are on 5s or 6s. Okay, so We need to just make sure that we're gapping our plugs correctly. So here, there's the distance between the top and the electrode inside, and on a standard 12 volt 3 ohm or a ballast system, you need to set that gap to 25 thou using your feeler gauges. If it's wider than 25 thou, you can just knock it on the metal, on the block, just gently, to close that gap down. But you want to aim for 25 thou. If you're running electronic ignition and a high power, you know, a low ohm coil, and you've got a high power spark, you can increase that gap to 35 thou, because you've got more power, so it's able to jump a wider gap, and you get a bigger spark, and it helps with the power of the car. We need to just mention the distributor. So inside the distributor, if you haven't got electronic, you'll have points. So with your points, again, you need to set the gap. Now I probably should have mentioned this with the spark plugs, but you need to get yourself a set of feeler gauges. These are thin slivers of metal, and they have written on them their widths. So 16 thou or 0.4 mil. So what's the right gaps? We've just used these to set the gap on our spark plug at 25 thou. Now we're going to use these, and apologies for mixing the measurements, but the Haynes manual will give the measurement for your points at 0.35 millimeters. So what you need to do, I'll just show this picture in the Haynes manual, is you need to use your feeler gauge inside your points to set the gap correctly. Basically, there's a screw, a single screw that you undo, and then you can gap them. You must make sure the car is in the one of 4 correct positions. Effectively, there's a square peg that drives the points. So if you put the car in gear, or if you can turn the engine until one of the 4 points of the square shaft is pushing the points, the contact breaker points, as far apart as possible. Then you put your feeler gauge in and you set that gap to 0.35 millimeters or whatever it says in your manual. Okay, now there's one other thing to say about the points. You can get a situation where you get build up on the contacts and pitting. So you try and put your feeler gauge in, and on the outside it slips in nicely, and then it gets stuck. And that's because there might be a little peak and hole. So instead of having 2 nice flat contacts like that, one will have a peak and one will have a hole like that. So those points are starting to wear out, and you need to replace them. You can just lightly clean up your points with a little bit of emery paper or something, just to get those contacts clean. But if you've got this situation going on, then obviously just put in a new set of points. They're cheap. Okay, so I think we've run through the basics of setting the fueling and different ways to do that, and checking the electric system. So overall, we've now gone through the whole car, and this is running a lot better than it was. I think the main issue with this car was that air leak coming from the spindle in the carburetor. If you're worried about air leaks, you can use a can of brake cleaner when the engine is running, and just spray around the inlet manifolds and the that spindle on the carburetor. If you spray some brake cleaner and you hear the engine note increase, that means it's sucking air, and obviously in turn brake cleaner, and that's being used as fuel and will increase the revs. So that's one way you can try and diagnose an air leak. But I think that was the main issue with this car. As I say, it now runs a lot better that we've got everything checked over and replaced as necessary. If you want to get it running perfectly, a rolling road or a tuner where they can do things like profile the needle correctly, and also they can set custom curve on your distributor so that those weights fly out at the right speed and at the right time in the rev range. Also, they can check something called the dwell angle and make sure that increases with your revs as well. But that one needs special instrumentation and measuring. This is just a DIY guide. I have 0 to 60 this car a few times, and it's coming in roughly at what the factory spec times are, and this has got a stage 1 kit, so you might say, well, it should be coming in faster, because the stage 1 kit's worth about 15% performance apparently. However, it's also got 90,000 miles and original piston rings, etc. So we've probably lost about 15% of those 40 horses that it would have come out of the factory with. So I'm fairly happy that this is DIY tuned and running pretty well. So thanks for watching this part. If you haven't seen the other 2 parts and you want to do the DIY tune, go back and watch all 3, and that should get you somewhere close. Let me know if this helps you out. If you want to drop a comment below, I'd like to hear if it has helped anyone. Thanks for watching, guys, and we will get a video up on the MPI in the not too distant future, because we've actually started to make a little bit of progress on that. Bye for now.